Good morning, good morning. How you guys doing? That was pathetic. Y'all sang better than that. Come on now. All right. Hey, man, great to have you guys. My name's Pastor Chris. This is your first time, man. We are excited that you are here and believe that God has something for you this morning. We are in the book of Psalms. I don't know about you, but if you didn't like that, then you're not going to like heaven. And can I just say for just a moment, can we stop and just maybe spend a few moments thinking about the fact that God is coming back? That He's sending His Son Jesus back to make everything right. And that when He does that, those of us who have a relationship with Christ, guess what? We're going to go to heaven. Can you just imagine that with me for just a moment? No, seriously, stop for just a moment and think about being in the presence of a holy God that maybe you've spent your whole life desiring to serve and striving to serve. For some of you, maybe you came to Christ at a really young age and you've been living for Him for a very long time. And man, you just long for that time. I know people who are in their older years, a lot of times, man, they long for that. My mom and dad, right before they passed away a few years ago, I can think of those moments, thinking about how they were longing for that moment to be in the presence of God, because they were in a hospital room and they didn't want to be there, and they were kind of struggling with that peace, and they were looking for it and walking through Ashley's dad, and he passed away at a young age too, and being able to see what was happening, but longing for this moment where they're in the presence of a holy God. Can you imagine? Because we get too caught up. We get too caught up in what's going on in the world around us so many times. I think that we lose sight, we forget of what's next for us if we have a relationship with God. And we think this is great, man. This is nothing compared to what heaven's going to be like. Nothing, not even close. Those guys are good, but they're not that good. But they're good. Man, I love it. I love the heartbeat of this team, and I love that there's their pure desire, man, to bring us into the presence of a holy God and then prepare us for what the Word wants to say to us. Man, I love that. And I say it quite frequently, man, if you don't like a large church, you're going to hate heaven. Man, because here's what I believe. Listen, come along with me on this journey. Come along with me on this journey. Listen, I believe that what God is doing in the midst of this church is He's raising up people that want to be a kingdom force in this community. That's what I'm asking. That's what I'm desiring. That's what I want to be a part of, is helping a group of people go the same direction after a great God. So we're in Psalm 90. Psalm 90 through 95 is what we'll be looking at this morning. Psalm 90 through actually 106 consists of what is book 4. So the Psalms are broken up into 5 different books. Psalm 90 through 106 is this book 4 that was put together. One of the authors is Moses. Some of the authors, David, which he's authored a whole bunch of the Psalms. And then there's some unnamed. But the whole purpose for Psalm 90 through 106 is this. It's this reminder that God reigns as King. So we've been traveling through, if you've been with us over the course of the summer, which, to be really honest with you, we didn't anticipate growing during the summer. We kind of thought that, hey, there'll be some people will kind of shrink back in number a little bit, which typically happens in the life of a church because people are on vacation and everything. But to be really honest with you, our numbers haven't slowed down if you've looked around recently. We had 205, I believe, at the first service. Because what I believe is God, hopefully, it's not because you're coming to hear the worship band. It's not because you're coming to hear me. Because if you're coming for me, you're coming for the wrong reason. But what I believe is happening is God stirring in the hearts of people who want to run after the truth this morning, who want to take the truth of God out of this place, out of our own personal relationship with Jesus, and we want to take it into a world that's dying and going to hell, period. And heaven, they don't even know how to think about heaven. They don't even know how to think about what's next. But what we know to be true is what God is doing in His Word and who He is that we're beginning to understand. So what God wants to do, starting in chapter 90, is He wants to begin to help us understand His consistency, who He is as God. And so we'll look this morning at 4 characteristics of who God is in His nature that hopefully begin to help us build a foundation of who He is. Listen, don't just go through the motions. Don't just show up to church on a Sunday morning. Don't just kind of lollygag through the tulips. I get going so fast I don't even know what to say. I just sometimes say what comes out of my mouth, which is not always good. But it's this consistency with God. It's that He never changes. God is the same today that He was when He created the world. He's been faithful in all those kind of things all throughout generation after generation. He never changes. And everything around us is always changing. He's the one thing that does not change. And this morning we're going to look at 4 characteristics of God. In chapter 90, we start with this place where Moses is kind of talking about what is life, right? What is life? What is it? What's the purpose? What's the purpose of life? The culture has thrown caution to the wind, right? We've decided to do whatever feels good. Whatever seems right in our own lives with no real moral compass. I mean, we talked about it. We talked about it last week, and I don't know where you stand on the issue, but to be honest with you, the Bible's pretty clear that abortion's murder. And so, but the culture has other ideas. And so we have to, if we're going to be the people that God wants us to be, we have to be able to stand on the foundation that regardless of what's going on around us, we have to stay focused on the fact that we are here to bring heaven to earth. As individuals, and hopefully what's happening is we're becoming more like Jesus. We're becoming more like who God created us to be. And out of that, people are seeing that there is more to life. There's more of a significance. There's more of a purpose. Because let's be honest, we live around a whole bunch of people. We live in a culture where a whole bunch of people are chasing after empty things. And the culture has bought into the lie that there's nothing after this life. It's just over. That the culture seems to be hardening its heart toward spiritual things. One of the things that I walked out of sabbatical with over the last 7 or 8 weeks is that we have to become a church. We have to be followers of Jesus and become my new mission to help people understand that we have to engage the culture with grace and truth. Listen, parents, you have to tell your kids they're either a boy or a girl. There's no in between. God said He created Adam and He created Eve. You don't let them determine that. You tell them the truth. And I know that in the days ahead I'll get hate mail over that. And to be honest with you, I just really don't care. But listen, it's not just me, okay? Because you're going to have to do the same thing. You're going to have to do the same thing. There's a group of girls, I think in North Carolina, decided that they were going to be cats. They were going to identify as cats. Like, and to be really honest with you, it makes me want to walk up their parents and punch them in the face. I mean, that's my humanness, right? I know Jesus said turn the other cheek, but I want to walk up and punch them in the face and say, what's your problem? Like, tell your kids the truth. Can you imagine standing before God and saying, oh, I identified as a cat? And God going, what? I think he would be confused by that one. And I realize that probably as we talk more about those cultural things, people are going to be offended, but we have to tell people the truth. I realize that there's grace with truth. We can't just be all truth, but we can't be all grace. And I realize that some of those conversations, although they'll be very hard and they'll be very difficult and will probably end in totally different things, we have to trust that the Holy Spirit is working in such a way that at one point they will begin to know the truth. But the culture right now is hardening its heart towards spiritual, eternal things, okay? You see, we're becoming more of a spiritual culture, just not the right spiritual things. What we're doing is we're creating our own spirituality. We're worshiping the sun and the moon. We're worshiping our own ideals. We're doing our own things instead of worshiping the one true God who never changes, who's always consistent, and he is eternal. So Moses begins to dive into this a little bit in chapter 90. He begins to help us understand this. Realize that when scholars believe that when Moses actually wrote this, it was when they were exiting captivity. They had been in captivity in Egypt for so many years, and now God had set them free from that captivity. And realize that a journey that should have taken Moses and the Israelites 11 days took them 40 years. Wow, it sounds like our culture. There should be things that we should get to a lot quicker than we really do, right? Because we take side roads. So let's look at 90. Psalm 90 verses 1 and 2 says, Lord, you have been our dwelling place throughout all generations. Before the mountains were born, or you brought forth the whole world from everlasting to everlasting, you are God. And so really, if we back up through the Psalms over these last 89 chapters, we've seen kind of these emotional ups and downs. We've seen these writers that are lamenting like, God, where are you? And then praising him. Out of one side of their mouth, they're saying, God, where are you? Why are you not showing up? And then out of the other side of their mouth, they're like praising him. And what I love about the beginning of 90 and even on into a few latter chapters is that we begin to praise God for who he is and recognize that he is a God that never changes, that he stands firm, that regardless of what's going on around us, regardless of the decisions that we make, he is still God. And he does not change. And Moses is affirming that. And so out of this, it's our significance in life is found in who God is. And the problem is so many people are chasing other significant things. They want more money. They want a bigger house. They want a better car. They want a better wife. They want a better husband. They want a better looking body. They want all these things, and they're running after these things. And even when they achieve them, then they find they're empty. You can go play the lottery and you can win $1.28 billion. And guess what? You'll still be unhappy. And probably the majority of you say, well, no, I won't. Yeah, you will. What is it? 80% of people who play the lottery are broke in 3 to 5 years. You're like, how can you spend that much money? As Americans, we're really good at it. Now, if for whatever reason you win it and you want to give some to the church, I'll be more than happy to take the devil's money. I'd have to work through that one. But our significance in life is found in who God is. And so Moses begins to help us understand that as we read this chapter and read further into the chapters that are to come. I love verse 12. Verse 12 says this, teach us to number our days that we may gain a heart of wisdom. So he's saying, hey man, if you want your life to be significant, if you want it to matter for something, then pay attention to every single day that goes by. Each day of your life matters. Right? Yes, God gave you a beginning date. And yes, God gave you an ending date. Do you know that? He gave your days are numbered. As the hairs on your head are numbered, you already have an end date. God already knows what that end date is. And so it becomes our responsibility, if we know that, to live with eternity in mind, saying, okay, God, what matters between the beginning date and the end date? It matters. It has significance. And so he says, teach us to number our days that we may gain a heart of wisdom. That we may gain a heart of wisdom. I started reading a book while I was on sabbatical. It's by Mark Batterson. It's called Win the Day. And what it helps begin to understand is it takes the Scripture and says, hey, out of the Scripture, there are kind of 7 things that we begin to apply into our life that help us take each day and make it matter for something that has eternal value. Because how often do we go through a day and the things that we do, if we come to the end of the day and we look back at that day, how many eternal things have we deposited into that day? And what I love is he says this, time is measured in minutes, but life is measured in moments. And so we look at the moments that we have, because if we're not careful, if we're not tuned in, if we're not focused into the things of God, then what will happen is we'll miss opportunities in life. You'll miss an opportunity with your neighbor, and you'll miss an opportunity with your kid. And you'll miss an opportunity with your husband or your wife. And so we win the day by staying focused on the things. It's great to have life goals. It's great to have this dream of who you want to be and where you want to go and all those kind of things. But the difficult part becomes when each day we have to say, what are we going to do today to win the day? To make today matter for eternal things. And our significance is found in knowing who God is. You see, because there'll be days that you screw up. There'll be many days that you look back. All of us sit on this side and say, you know what? If I look at my last few years, I don't care if you're even 15 here. You can look back at some days that you screwed up. If you're 80 here, then you got a lot of days you screwed up. If you're 50 like me, you got some days you screwed up too. And that's where grace comes in. There's been a lot of days where I wish I was more focused on the eternal things than on my temporary things. And then I love Psalm 91. He begins to help us understand who God is. Psalm 91 verses 1 and 2 says this, whoever dwells in the shelter of the Most High will rest in the shadow of the Almighty. I will say of the Lord, He is my refuge and my fortress, my God, in whom I trust. And so he begins to lay this foundation. Like we dwell, if we're going to find significance of life, if we're going to live in this idea of who God is, then what we have to begin to understand is that we dwell in the shelter of the Most High. We rest in the shadow of the Almighty. We take refuge. He's our refuge. He's our fortress. He's our God in whom we trust. And essentially what he's trying to say in Psalms 91 is this. Who is God? He is our protector, shadow, refuge, fortress. And so no matter what is going on in the world around us, and let's be honest, there's a whole lot going on. There's a whole lot of things that we don't fully understand. There's a whole lot of things that are under the surface that are happening. There's a whole lot of supernatural things that are happening that we don't see. And guess what? We have to be able to walk through each day in each life in this dwelling place in the shelter of the Most High. Because otherwise, if you don't, it will jack you up. And you will begin to lose focus. And I imagine what was happening is Moses and David and all these writers of the Psalms, they fully understood these things. But they had to come to this place where they recognized that God is my protector. And do you, when you walk into a very difficult situation, is that the first thing in your mind? Oh, God's my protector. You see, because I think what happens is we look at life situation, we say, well, why did this happen? And why did that happen? Why did this happen to that kid? And why did this happen to that person? It just doesn't make sense. You're right. And you're not supposed to know because you're not God. You don't see the big picture. You're not as smart as Him. Not even close. And so we have to come to that place when things don't make sense that we still say, God is my protector. And I will trust Him. Deuteronomy 1:30 says that God fights for us. That He literally fights for us. I love that thought. I think about that sometimes, and I think about putting myself in a situation. I kind of have this vision of putting myself in a situation, but around me is God's army fighting for me. Because here's what I believe. The next 10 years are going to be really hard for me. They're going to be really hard for us. They're really going to be hard for you as a follower of Jesus. And if you don't have His army around you, then you've already lost. You've got to understand that He's your protector. And so if I want Him to be my protector, then I dwell in the shelter of the Most High. I rest. Can you imagine resting, knowing that people are after you? I rest in the shadow of the Almighty. That's one thing God's teaching me. You see, because I can get pretty upended with this whole church stuff, being a pastor of church. I can allow my mind when I lay down to go to sleep to start running so fast that sometimes I'm just like, I can't sleep. And to be honest with you, I didn't sleep much last night. And sometimes you tend, and I learned this on sabbatical, I didn't think a thing about the church. And guess what? It's still here. And I got to be able to rest in the shadow of the Almighty. When God allows physical things to attack my body, then I have to be able to rest in the shadow of the Almighty. When He attacks my family, I have to be able to rest in the shadow of the Almighty. When He allows things to happen in situations around me or in the church, I have to be able to rest because I find my significance in Him, not in what's going on around me. He is our protector. Then Psalm 92 gives us another characteristic of God. Now, it's really interesting because I think He gives us a little bit of two viewpoints that I want to point out. First, in verses 5 through 7 in Psalm 92, it says this: How great are your works, Lord! Lord, how profound your thoughts! Senseless people, listen, senseless people do not know. Fools do not understand that though the wicked spring up like grass and all evildoers, what? And all evildoers flourish, they will be destroyed. And so what essentially He's beginning to help us understand is that not only God is our protector, but God is our provider. And we'll read that in just a minute. So I went ahead and gave you kind of the thought behind this, that God's our provider. You're like, well, that doesn't say He's our provider. Because what happens in our world today, sometimes we look at other people and say, man, they're not even living for Jesus, but it seems like they got it better than us. Man, they're making more money. Their life is better. Oh, man, what, blah, 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 blah. We begin to compare ourselves to other people. To be honest with you, I don't want to be like them. Because what it tells me is that God fully understands what they're doing. And at some point, when it seems like all things are good in their life, guess what? They're really falling apart. And to be honest with you, if you were to sit down with most of the people who their God, money is their God, their relationships are their God, their car is their God, all these kind of things, their job is their God, if you were to sit down and get down to the root of it, guess what? They're empty on the inside. They actually have nothing. And so we got to be careful looking at what's going on around us and thinking, well, man, that person's got it better than me. Because our view of success is different than their view of success. I can be poor as the day is long and still walk in the hope and the joy of who God is. Listen. This is what God says. The righteous will what? The righteous will flourish like a palm tree. They will grow like a cedar of Lebanon. It doesn't mean that all of a sudden you're going to go to your bank account, pull it up, and all of a sudden there's going to be more money there. No, but we have to trust in God as our provider. We have to be stewards with what He does give us. He says that those who take care of the things He has given us, He's willing to give us more. And we can't look around and say, well, I wish I had that, and I wish I had this, and I wish I had that. When I believe that God gives us everything we need and probably everything that we can handle. And if you have a lot, then God is trusting you, and you better be a good steward of it. Planted in the house of the Lord, verse 13, they will flourish in the courts of our God. They will still bear fruit in old age. Let me read that again. That's for like half of us in here. Those of you guys who are young, it's coming. By the way, 50's the new 20. 60's the new 30. 70's the new 40. And 80, I'm not sure where they land yet. They will still bear fruit in old age. They will stay fresh and green. You feel fresh and green? I'm sweaty as all get out. They will still stay fresh and green, proclaiming. How do we do that? Like, how do we do that as we get older? It's because we're proclaiming the Lord is upright. He is my rock, and there is no wickedness in Him. So we see these two totally different perspectives. One is people who are running after the wrong things, and it says, guess what? The wicked will not flourish. They'll will flourish for a time, but then they'll be destroyed. But then He says, hey, the righteous will flourish for eternity. Who is God? He is our provider. Do you trust God as your provider? He's your protector. He's your provider. Do you trust Him? Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will make your path straight. But that means we got to trust Him in the hard times. We got to trust Him when things don't make sense. We got to trust Him when people come against us saying, you know what? Those things that you're saying, they're not right. And you're like, well, okay, that's your opinion. I'm standing on the truth of the Bible. And that's going to happen. And then Psalm 93, verse 4, mightier than the thunder of the great waters, mightier than the breakers of the sea. The Lord on high is mighty. Who is God? He is the God who reigns in power. Not only is He our protector, not only is He our provider, but now He is the God who reigns in power, and we can trust Him in everything. We just have to rest, dwell in the shelter of the Most High, rest in the shadow of the Almighty. He has to be our fortress. He has to be our refuge. Because I believe there's a time coming in the days ahead, much like the Israelites who got out into the wilderness and began to complain or didn't feel like they had anything to eat, and God dropped manna. When the hard times come for us as Americans, and listen to me, they are coming. I'm not prophesying, I'm just telling you. The way that the world is going, we're going to have to trust for God's provision in our life. I don't care how much money you have. God, He reigns in power, and His power is endless. And when those moments come and we can't figure it out, we just got to trust His power, because He is mightier than the thunder of the great waters. He is mightier than the breakers of the sea. The Lord on high is mighty. That's who He is. Psalm 94. This is the one we don't like. Right? We like the fact that He is our protector. We want to be protected. We want the provision. And then he goes, we want the power. We want to see God's power at work around us. But then he goes into 94. And it says this, verse 1 and 2. The Lord is a God who avenges. O God, who avenges, shine forth. Rise up, judge of the earth. Pay back to the proud what they deserve. Who is God? He is the righteous judge. We like to think about God as a loving God, provider, protector, power. But it also says that He is the righteous judge, that He demands justice on earth. The wicked will be destroyed. What I love is, as I was reading this and thinking about it, one of the commentaries that I read said this: God shows justice not merely to punishing the wicked, but by rewarding the righteous. And so really that brought me back to the question, what are you living for? What are you living for? How do you organize each day? Or does it just happen on Sunday morning when you're here for an hour? Okay, God, I'll give you, I'll honor and praise you. And then 95, it says, because of who He is, bring Him praise. Because He is protector. Because He is provider. Because He reigns in power. Because He is the righteous judge. Bring power, bring praise to Him. So let our life bring praise to Him. Let our words bring praise to Him. Let our singing bring praise to Him. Psalm 95, verses 1 through 6. I'm actually going to go through 8. But it says this: come, let us sing for joy to the Lord. Let us shout aloud to the rock of our salvation. Let us come before Him with thanksgiving and extol Him with music and song. For the Lord is the great God, the great King above all gods. In His hands are the depths of the earth, and the mountain peaks belong to Him. The sea is His, for He made it, and His hands formed the dry land. Come, let us bow down and worship. Let us kneel before the Lord our Maker, for He is our God, and we are His people. We are the people of His pasture and the flock under His care. Today, if only you would hear His voice, do not harden your hearts. You see, because what happens is we get so caught up. We get so caught up in the world and in the things going around, and we begin to be deceived by the enemy. Think, well, God's just not showing up in my situation. And when we become deceived by all that, when our perception changes, then all of a sudden we stop to stand on the foundation of who God is. And we begin to eventually slowly fade into hardening our hearts toward the things of God. but because of who He is. Provider, protector, reigns in power, the righteous judge. We will bring Him power. We will bring Him praise. So this morning, take refuge in God. It's a place of safety, regardless of what's going on around you. It's trusting in His protection. It's trusting in His provision. It's trusting in His power. It's trusting in Him as the righteous judge. Will you bow your heads with me for just a moment? What is it that you're building your life on? How is it that you've decided to answer this question, what is life, and where is its significance? Do you trust Him as your protector? Do you trust Him as your provider? Do you trust Him as the God who reigns in power? Do you trust Him as the righteous judge? Because what the enemy will do, the enemy will make you feel like your past is too messed up, that when you stand before God, that you're too messed up for His grace and His mercy and His love. And we have to trust in the fact that if we are striving to live for the things of God, it's a question of where is your heart this morning? Like when you wake up in the morning, what is it that your heart is attached to? What is it that your heart desires? And has that become the things of God, or are you just going through the motions? Have you become more consumed with your job or trying to keep up financially or trying to make more money or do other things? Yet God and a relationship with Him has just become an afterthought. You see, when we bring Him praise, when we honor Him, it's not just on Sunday morning, but it's every single day of every minute that we strive to say, God, I want to honor You in my life. Maybe you're here and you've never given your life to Christ. And maybe you need to start right now by saying, yes, God, I want to honor You in my life. I want You to come into my life. I've been running after all these other things. God, my world's falling. Maybe you're in that dark place that we talked about last Sunday. You're in a place of darkness where it's hard for you to even see out. It's hard for you to even see the things of God. And maybe it's because you just haven't started in relationship with Him. Maybe it's because you've been trying to dig your own way out of the darkness. Will you trust Him today? In this moment, will you trust Him? Will you make Him King? King of your heart. Let's be a church that we allow God to raise us up, to be a force in our community, because there's people that stand on the foundation of God's word. They trust Him as protector. They trust Him as provider. They trust Him as the God who reigns in power. They trust Him as the righteous judge. Because of that, we will not be shaken. You stand with me. We're going to sing a song, King of My Heart. And if you need to make a decision right now, will you make that decision before you walk out these doors? Will you make that decision today? Now, hopefully,